This is
Wow, it's actually
All right, are we ready to go, guys?
yeah. This is our last meeting, yes.
Yes, this is our last meeting.
Yeah.
The legislative session is supposed to end Thursday, the 8th. And at this point, so on last Friday, we just had a cutoff date, basically, where bills had to be passed by the opposite chamber. So if bills started in the House, had to be passed by the Senate by 5 o'clock on Friday, or it would be considered dead, unless it's connected to the budget. So that's the kind of caveat. So this week, the legislators are working on finalizing the budget and then also resolving differences between the chambers on legislation. So for example, if a bill passed the House, but then the Senate made amendments to it, thinking that they needed to improve it, that's not necessarily the final word. So the House would have to agree in those amendments. And they can either, so it's called a concurrence process. So if the House passes a bill, the Senate makes some amendments, it goes back to the House this week, and the House can say, yes, we'll concur, or no, we don't concur. And if they don't concur, then it goes back to the other body, and they can insist or recede or request a conference committee. So that's kind of where we are now, is kind of sorting out the differences between the chambers on different pieces of policy, and then finalizing any big bills that have ties to the budget. Most of them are big bills. There are some small bills too that might have ties to the budget, and then figuring out if they're going to be able to reach an agreement on the supplemental budget. So that's kind of where we are.
So that's an automatic conference committee sort of thing, huh?
Well, not necessarily on the budget.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure, on the budget. So there's just been a lot of speculation, the past few years with when the Senate was controlled by Republicans and the House was controlled by Democrats, the budgets were largely negotiated in, more or less a bipartisan fashion, where you'd have Republicans and Democrats at the table. But this year, with the Senate also being controlled by Democrats as well as the House, even though it's a slim margin, there are, rumors that it may just be a straight partisan budget, that meaning it would need 25 votes in the Senate and 50 votes in the House, and maybe there'll be no Republicans voting for those budgets. So right now, of course, the place is full of rumors. That's one of the rumors that we're hearing. The other big question is whether or not the legislature will do anything to fix property taxes. So there's been, I don't know if you guys read the paper, see stuff on Twitter, but there's been a lot of kind of outcry from the work that was done last year to adequately fund education to address the McCleary issue. And so property taxes was kind of one piece of the pie. And it largely hit the big counties more than the small, rural counties. But there are a lot of complaints coming into legislators. So there's talk about whether there's any deal that can be cut to rearrange or reduce those property taxes. And the state has more money coming in general this year. So that's something that's on the table. Whether it's tied to the budget is unknown. So that's another piece. It could be something that they do separately, maybe in exchange for something else, because they need more votes for that. So for that piece, they would need Republican votes to get that done, because it requires a larger majority. So
right. The split is for all intents and purposes 50-50, isn't it?
Pretty much. They have basically one vote advantage, for the most part. Although, so, the other thing that's happening just, in terms of the environment down here is, as soon as the legislators go home, it becomes campaign season. Right. So this is an election year, a big election year where all of the House members are up for election, and half of the senators. And so there will be aggressive campaigning, and some legislators have already announced that they're not running again. So there's like Senator Baumgartner, who's from Spokane, is not running again. Representative Haler's Eastern Washington, he's not running. Representative Melanie Stambaugh from Puyallup, she's Republican, not running. Representative Jay Rodney from kind of the Issaquah area, also Republican, not running. I think there's another one, but you'll see more and more of those. And now all predictions are at this point that Democrats will pick up more seats just because of the Trump effect. It's not particularly popular here.
What do we call that? The effect? Why would Democrats be picking up more seats now? What do we call that? It's the reverse of it, actually. It's reverse the coattail effect, right? Yeah. So.
Exactly. Question?
So I know that the bills have to be going through the House by Wednesday, but when does the governor need to see them?
Oh, good question. Yeah. So governor doesn't necessarily have to sign bills for them to become effective. If he does nothing, they also become effective. But so there's this rule called the 5-day rule for the governor. So bills that reach his desk within 5 days of the end of the session have to be signed within 5 days, or they automatically become law. So signed or vetoed. A bill that reaches his desk within less than 5 days of the end of the session, then he has 20 days to sign or veto, or it automatically becomes law. So what we see kind of this time of year is when a bill passes a chamber, for example, say it's the Senate, and you look at it in the computer system, sometimes it doesn't move to the governor's office for a few days. So the clerk who's responsible for that will start slow walking bills to the governor's office to give them time, because otherwise they're under a lot of pressure, because they have to analyze all the bills that they get too, and the governor's staff has to make recommendations on whether or not he should sign or veto part of it or veto all of it. So there's a lot of slow walking going on right now. Other questions? Anything you guys are interested in? Anything you've heard? Seen?
Any questions on HB 6620?
Yeah, so that's that school safety bill. That bill, so what's interesting about that, it was introduced late, after cutoff.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be done, for two reasons. Sometimes it's done as a statement, to make a statement, and to respond to a public outcry, which you obviously have here. Sometimes it can be done seriously in an attempt to make policy at the last minute, as long as there's a budget implication. So that bill does have a fiscal note. It's not a huge fiscal note, like $60,000 for this biennium, I think, and $100,000 for the following biennium. Let's see, it's currently on the Senate floor. It was heard in Ways and Means, but it hasn't moved beyond that. So I kind of think, given the weight of it, probably wouldn't move. I mean, one of the things it does is changes the age to purchase I forget what you call them, the automatic
assault
rifles to 21. And the NRA, is very involved. So get a glimpse of kind of what's happening in the national dialogue here in Washington as well.
Yeah, and that's gonna weight it down, that clause, right? That particular argument.
Yeah, it would weigh it down, but I don't expect the issue to go away. I think the issue will be around next year, and it'll be interesting.
Yeah. Any specific questions about it?
Got a question up front? Yeah.
If the bill were to fail in this session, what is the likelihood that it could be reintroduced?
Yeah, I think, so this is the second in a 2-year session officially. So next year it would have to be reintroduced as a new bill. But if the momentum continues that those Parkland students have really started and been responsible for, I don't see this issue going away. It's a really interesting time now, I think, with people finally starting to get fed up with what's happening federally and wanting to take matters into their own hands. There's more energy around actual, voters taking control of issues and really demanding to be heard. So I think this election season will be really, really interesting, not only on the state level, but nationally, just to see what happens and see what they do with this issue. The whole issue of guns has never really moved here, despite all of the school shootings. So we'll see if they can make a difference.
Because just a comment, I was kind of amazed that a bill like this came up so quickly after the cutoff date. I mean, it's got a lot of stuff in it. It's, you know, I mean, it's pretty well written.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it tells you that somebody's been thinking about it.
Yeah.
Before that, and I think, you know, there's probably legislators that would have liked to have done more. I mean, we did pass a bill to, I think, prohibit bump stocks. I didn't actually spend much time looking at that, but there's been some work done on that topic already. So I think, you know, this was an opportunity, and legislators are also feeling the pressure of the election coming up and wanting to look responsive. And, you know, Washington is known as a progressive state. So people will say, well, you know, why aren't we doing something on this? And so they, you know, they introduced this bill, which was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
Any questions about it?
This bill.
Any other bill?
I'm curious about the exact reason as to why the bill that we were looking to see and tracking, to see if it would pass, to see why it failed.
yeah, so I talked with the prime sponsor, Representative Orwell, and she just said she felt like the bill needed more money. They needed more programs in place to support these kids. And because this year is a year that they just do the supplemental budget, meaning, so like they'll do the big budget in the odd years, right? So they did the large budget in 2017, and then this year they just make adjustments to it. That's the idea anyway. And so she felt like there was a commitment and energy around having this bill revisited next year with more money allocated and more programs designed to actually help the kids that are in that situation.
I mean, wasn't that one of your guys' criticisms, that like
They didn't talk about where the money was going to come
didn't talk about where money was going to come from, how stuff was going to get allocated, if it was going to come from a new money source, new revenue source, or if it was going to come from existing stuff that's going to be taken from unused money from, I mean, they had those questions.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you guys were saying too, you know, what's going to happen to the kids? So they're not prosecuted for prostitution, then what, you know? So many, I think the then what was not adequately addressed in the bill. That's what legislators felt like. And with a short session, it's just hard to throw all that together. So sometimes bills just take more than 1 year. Sometimes they take multiple years, especially when you have kind of a new idea. But the first year is often the time when you're figuring out, okay, what questions need to be answered, and is this the final solution or is it not the final solution? So, because there's really no opposition. It was really a bill that had a lot of support, and it was bipartisan support.
Right.
So yeah.
It's
Back
school safety and
back to 6620.
yeah.
Okay.
Is there any like signs of like how it's doing?
Yeah, so the bill it was heard in Ways and Means on March 1st, and it's just sitting on the Senate floor. It does have 21 amendments posted. It's called Posted on the Bar. So if you actually go to the website, you can look up the bill, and there are 21 amendments. And what that usually means is, you know, what that means to the speaker, or in this case, it would be the majority leader, is that if they wanted to do that bill, it would take a lot of time. And that is a strategy actually for killing bills, is to get legislators who don't like the bill to introduce a number of amendments. And you might get several legislators to introduce several amendments, and each amendment might do something small or might represent another different argument. So I think just looking at that, it's pretty unlikely that they're going to take that bill up this year. But the fact that it was introduced and moved actually out of committee after cutoff is interesting. I really do think it'll come up again next year. Any other questions? You guys, anybody want to become a lobbyist? You guys interested in, you know?
I already asked some questions, so if you guys want to pick up the slack.
Would you mind going through your day-to-day process?
Sure.
Okay.
So it depends on the day, but so right now it's much slower because we're winding things down. But on an average day, I'm basically looking every morning at the introduction sheets, seeing what bills are introduced, sending them out. If I see a bill that's looks like it might impact one of my clients, I read it. And then if I think, yeah, it does impact my client, then I send it to clients for their review and get their feedback. And then if they're concerned about it, we decide what the next step is. Or if they like it, we decide what the next step is. So that would be, deciding to testify on a bill, deciding to maybe write letters, finding out what other stakeholders care about the bill. So it might be engaging in conversations with other lobbyists to find out what the strategy is regarding the bill, before a hearing. So it's really, kind of multifaceted. And then testifying on bills, but really most of the decisions down here are made through one-on-one conversations and figuring out how to influence the decision makers. So that could be by providing them information, but it also could be by figuring out who they listen to the most. So, who are their friends, who are their allies, legislators, who do they listen to, and how can I influence who they listen to, whether that's the media, whether it's working on finding a way to get an op-ed placed, for example, if it's a really big issue, or whether it's, just sometimes you can't get a specific legislator's ear for whatever reason, but you might go to some of their friends or other legislators that might care. So a lot of it's just kind of trying to figure out how to read people and change their minds or influence their decisions. This last week was really, long and boring, and to an outsider, it might appear that we just do nothing as lobbyists because we stand around. The legislature was working like 12, 14-hour days, right? And they're behind closed doors on the floor passing bills. You can go up in the gallery and watch, but basically we stand outside, walk around the halls, listen to rumors, watch who's talking to who. So if there's a large group of, for example, pharmaceutical lobbyists gathered, those of us who are trying to keep healthcare costs down will be, spying on them and trying to figure out, what they're talking about and what legislators are talking about. So like one of the #1 rules for lobbying is you got to be there. Like you can't dial it in, you can't email it in, you got to be there in person to watch the body language, to see who's talking to who, and then to be able to react to it if you need to. So it's kind of a very weird job. There's really nothing like it, but it's never boring, that's for sure. So, and it's different at different parts of the session.
What kind of businesses do you represent?
So I represent all businesses. So I represent Regents Blue Shield, which is a health insurer. I represent Ford Motor Company, they make cars. I represent CVS Health, which is a pharmacy, large retail pharmacy, and they also have minute clinics and a pharmacy benefit manager called Caremark. I represent the Washington Bankers Association, so that's an association made up of community banks and then large banks. I represent USAA, which is a insurance company and financial institution that serves veterans and military. I represent Progressive Insurance. They're another auto insurer. Company called Veritech that does it's a technology company that holds some state contracts. And I represent a company called Scion Dental that is a kind of a dental insurer basically. So a lot of larger business, and it's kind of an interesting book of business in Washington because it's not a super business friendly state. So typically I'm more often than not trying to pass bills, but trying to stop bad bills from going forward or fix them so that they're less bad. That's largely what I do. In the past few years, there's become more of a kind of a dialogue where big business is not popular, small business is popular. So many of my clients have been kind of subject to that mindset down in Olympia as well. So just having to, address that and continue to affirm that there's value in large business as well as small business, and their employers. And many of my clients employ a lot of people in the state. So kind of talking that up and whatnot. Other questions?
Are there lobbyists out there that like represent unions?
Yeah, so there's like a lobbyist for everything, believe it or not, like anything you can imagine. So yeah, there are, every union has a lobbyist, has, lobbying groups. The teachers union is probably the most powerful union in the state, for example. And, when you even talk about campaign contributions, everybody thinks, oh, big business. Well, it's spread around on all sides. So, the big powerhouses from a Democratic perspective would be the unions, would be the trial lawyers, would be the tribes. So the Indian tribes in Washington have become extremely powerful, and that's fairly recent, really. That's since 2000, but actually it's incrementally more and more the truth, and it's also really interesting just in terms of the impact that they're having on everything from decisions relating to water, right? Because water has to do with fishing, and fishing rights are tribal rights. So it's pretty interesting.
Tony, didn't you have a question?
Yeah, I was just curious what kind of education and requirements it takes to be a lobbyist.
It doesn't take anything. So the straight answer is it doesn't take anything. There's no requirements. You just have to file with the Public Disclosure Commission. In reality, you should have a college degree. And it depends on what kind of clients that you would be interested in. So, I'm a lawyer. There's a handful of lawyers up here, but I'd say that's not the majority. A lot of people who are lobbyists either came from the campaign side. So say that, they were in college and they started working on campaigns, volunteering and whatnot. And, that's how they worked their way in to then maybe working for a legislator as the legislative assistant or working for one of the caucuses. Another way in is people working as policy staff. So more of those are lawyers. I used to be policy staff. Another way in is if you have a relative who's a lobbyist. So it's kind of an interesting little tight-knit group. There's a lot of people that are lobbyists here whose parents were lobbyists, and they just took over their parents' business. And then there's a couple like big lobbying firms, but it's not like that in general in Washington State. Like in DC, you have all these big, huge lobbying firms, right? These people went to Ivy League schools. Well, in our state, it's really not like that. So there's
Community college.
There's everything, just about everything. You can come from the advocacy side. If you're interested in unions, you can work. Like the union lobbyist. One of my good friends is a Teamsters lobbyist, and she was a Teamster for years. She worked labor, so she worked her way up, and she's now one of the lead lobbyists and very effective. So. Lots of ways in.
You were talking about the powers of tribes recently, or just like a minute ago, and that made me remember. Is there a bill that is currently like being considered about taking away water rights from certain tribes?
Well, there was a bill. There's a lot of water-related bills, but a really huge bill that has hit the media over the past few years was related to the use of water for building permits, and it was in response to a Supreme Court decision called the Hearst decision, where basically, especially out in Gig Harbor, especially if you live on the Key Pen, a lot of houses are on wells, right, and maybe not on a main water line. Well, this decision would have the Supreme Court decision basically impacted how permits would be received or available for building on property that was using a well. So it ended up being a big, huge mess, but they solved it this year, essentially. The reason the tribes care is the tribes care about salmon and fish, And so water consumption is a huge issue. So if you're wanting to keep healthy salmon runs, overconsumption of water and building is contrary to that. And then you also have, like, I have the bankers. So the banks cared about it because you had people with, say you owned land, you know, on like where we live. I live on Raft Island. Say you own land on Raft Island, it's on a well, you haven't developed it, and your dream was someday to retire there and build a little house. Well, guess what? Your property just became, you know, worth nothing because you couldn't build on it, basically, because no bank is going to loan you the money to do that, and you couldn't get access to that well. So that was a huge kind of mess for a couple of years, and they actually solved it this year. But the tribes were right in the middle of it, and were, you know, a significant player in that issue.
All right.
I have a question. I was wondering, how exactly do you come across representing these companies? Do you like apply or like go to them directly, or does your law firm like assign you to them?
So my clients, I've gotten almost all of them through referral, like through word of mouth, where, like, you know, I started out, so I used to be legislative staff. My husband is in our same law firm. He was there before I was. And I kind of thought, I worked for the state for 14 years, and I never actually thought I'd stay there 14 years. But then I was kind of like, okay, if I'm going to leave, I got to do it at some point. Otherwise, I'm going to stay for 30. You know, that's generally the path. So my husband had a client that needed a lobbyist. And so I decided to take the leap, which was hard to do because I had a good state job with a pension and healthcare. But I left for one client that didn't bring in very much money. But once I started working for that one client, then I ended up getting a referral for another client and then another. And what ends up happening in Olympia is, even though there's a lot of lobbyists, there's probably, you know, a finite number of credible and fairly good lobbyists. So, and then people get conflicted out. So there's a lot of clients I can't take. So if there's a lot of clients that will come to me, or potential clients, and I'm not able to take them, but then I'll refer them to a friend. And if you have somebody who just left government, for example, they don't have any conflicts, so they can take clients. But yeah, it's really not traditional marketing, you know, of yourself. Another question?
I have one more question. You talked about slow walking. Can you give me a definition of that term?
It'd be stalling, you know? Just, yeah, basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Slowing down a process so that, so that the answer can come a little bit later than it would normally, you know, come.
Thanks.
I don't know where we are on time. Do you guys?
I think we got about 2 minutes.
Okay, all right.
So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You guys, good luck for the rest of your year.
yeah, thank you.
You're gonna need it.
All right, take
So
care.
and you're looking forward to Cine Die, right?
Yes, absolutely. Sign and die is huge. So
End of the week, right?
Thursday.
Thursday.
Yeah, let's hope. Cross the fingers.
That's what seriously, it gavels it out of session.
It's called Sign and Die.
So that's the official time when it's over.
Is that why you had
So,
that?
okay, thank you
All
so
right,
much,
see
Carrie.
ya. Thanks.
Yeah.
Is that why you had that gavel flying?